The blue light of the monitor hummed against the damp plaster of the basement wall, casting long, jittery shadows across the stacks of moldering cardboard boxes. Outside, the rain in St. Jude's Bend didn't fall. It hung in the air like gray wool, soaking into the cedar shingles of the old cannery houses and turning the river into a thick, mustard-colored soup. Julian sat with his palms flat against the laminate desk, his fingertips absorbing the dull vibration of the hard drive. Upstairs, the floorboards groaned, 3 slow, hesitant steps, then silence. That was his mother, Elora. She would be standing by the kitchen window now, parting the heavy velvet drapes by a mere half-inch, her eyes scanning the gravel road for cars she didn't recognize, her breath fogging the cold pane until she had to wipe it clear with the sleeve of her oversized cardigan. She hadn't been to the grocery store in 7 months. When the delivery truck arrived, she hid in the pantry until the gravel crunched under the departing tires. Julian pulled up the first spreadsheet. The columns were clean, rendered in the cold, unfeeling font of an open-source database. In the first column was a name, Bernice Garrow. Beside it, a telephone number, a home address on the dry, pine-wooded ridge above the valley, and a list of 12 distinct email addresses, each one compiled from old church directories, defunct civic club rosters, and regional craft fair registries. Julian looked at the name until the letters lost their meaning and became nothing more than black marks on a glowing grid. He remembered when that name used to sound like peppermint oil and expensive leather. 3 years ago, Vance and Vessel was the only stained glass studio within 50 miles. Elora had started it in the old brick livery stable near the wharf, her hands permanently stained with the dull gray of lead came and the sharp, metallic tang of copper flux. She was an artisan who could look at a sheet of hand-blown cathedral glass and see where the light would fall at 4 o'clock on a November afternoon. But she was not a bookkeeper. When Bernice Garrow offered to handle the invoices, the payroll, and the tax filings in exchange for a 40% stake, Elora had wept with relief. Bernice was a pillar of the First Baptist Church, a woman whose voice possessed a strange, vibrating authority that made people sit up straighter in their pews. She wore gold-plated crosses that clinked against her starch-stiffened blouses, and she spoke of stewardship and divine favor as if she had a direct line to the ledger of heaven. The decline was slow, registered only in the dry click of Bernice's heels across the concrete floor and the steady, demanding drift of her requests. First, it was the employees. Bernice had hired 4 young apprentices from her church youth group, quiet, obedient girls who looked at Elora with a faint, puzzling coldness. Then came the requests for salary adjustments. Bernice's husband, Delbert, had allegedly thrown his back out while hauling timber, leaving him fully disabled, though Julian had seen him through the salt-crusted window of his backyard workshop, lifting cast-iron cylinder heads into the bed of his GMC truck with grease-blackened arms. Because Delbert was receiving cash-in-hand mechanics fees off the record, Bernice claimed she was the sole breadwinner of a household in crisis. She demanded raise after raise, her voice dropping into a soft, predatory register of manufactured grief that Elora, ever the peacekeeper, could not bring herself to refuse. By the second winter, the partner was drawing 20% more from the business account than the woman whose name was on the deed. The end did not arrive with a scream, but with a wet Wednesday morning and a grease smudge on a white envelope. Julian remembered his mother sitting at the workbench, her soldering iron still hot, smoking faintly in its stand. The envelope had been tucked beneath a sheet of amber glass. Inside was a single sheet of heavy bond paper. Bernice was leaving. She was taking the 4 apprentices. She was taking the client registry, the supplier contacts, and the digital designs Elora had spent 20 years drawing by hand. The letter was polite, drenched in the oily language of season-of-life transitions and praying for your future endeavors. By noon, the workshop was empty. The apprentices had already packed their toolboxes and cleared their lockers. A year later, the levee failed. It wasn't a wall of water. It was a slow, brown rise that smelled of diesel fuel, dead carp, and saturated silt. The St. Jude's River crept up the floorboards of Vance and Vessel, filling the electric kilns with 3 feet of liquid mud and cracking the expensive Italian refractory muffles. The insurance company pointed to a clause on page 14 concerning unmapped alluvial plains and denied the claim. Elora, already hollowed out by the betrayal, simply stopped. She did not clean the mud. She did not salvage the glass. She locked the double doors, walked home in the rain, and did not go back out. Now, Bernice's new studio, Garrow and Glassworks, sat on the high ridge where the water couldn't reach. She had taken 70% of Elora's old clientele. Her social media feed a constant, bright procession of ribbon cuttings, civic awards, and Bible verses framed by leaded glass. When Alora tried to apply for a quiet, low-paying clerk position at the county historical archives, the board, where Bernice's brother-in-law sat as treasurer, suddenly restructured the department, eliminating the role before the interview could take place. Julian leaned forward, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of his desk. The smallness of the town was a physical weight, a damp hand pressed against his mother's chest until she could barely draw breath. He looked at the cursor blinking in the empty search bar of an unindexed public records site. He had spent months collecting the details, not just the emails and phone numbers, but the small, mundane vulnerabilities of the Garrow household. The first move was a quiet one. Julian opened a virtual private network, routing his connection through a server in Reykjavik, and set up a clean, unlinked email account under the name dgarrow74. On Craigslist, he posted 3 separate listings in the regional free items section. The first was for a litter of purebred blue-nose pit bull puppies, free to a loving home, first come, first served, do not email, call only. He listed Bernice's personal cell phone number. The second was a listing for a vintage, working John Deere tractor, priced at $300 to ensure immediate, frantic interest from every collector within 3 states. He added a line. Working nights, please call between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. only. Ask for Bernie. The third listing was more specific. He targeted the local used car forums and high-volume digital queues, submitting Delbert's number as an eager seller looking for immediate cash offers on a non-existent diesel truck. Within 48 hours, the digital machinery began to turn. Julian sat in his basement, listening to the rain rattle the small window at ground level, imagining Bernice's phone buzzing on her nightstand at 2 in the morning. The sharp, high-pitched ring of a stranger asking if the blue pups were still available, followed 20 minutes later by a raspy voice from 2 counties over asking about the transmission on the John Deere. But that was merely the clearing of the throat. The real work required a deeper, more industrial approach. Julian spent the next week searching the digital underbelly of regional service providers. He focused on home maintenance, heavy construction, and environmental services. He built a small script that automated the submission of service inquiry forms. Using Delbert's name and their physical address on the ridge, Julian submitted urgent requests to every septic tank pumping service within a 60-mile radius. In the comments section of each form, he wrote with a crude, desperate specificity, "Need emergency pump out immediately." Wife's family came over for Sunday dinner, ate 3 large Papa John's pizzas, and now the main line is backing up into the master bath. There is raw sewage coming up through the shower drain. It's on the rug. We are desperate. We'll pay double for Sunday/night service. Please keep calling until we answer. Our cell reception is terrible up here. He didn't stop with septic services. He signed them up for free in-home consultations for metal roofing, crawlspace encapsulation, mold remediation, and commercial-grade pest control. He checked the boxes for immediate callback requested, and SMS notification allowed. On Thursday afternoon, Julian drove his rusted hatchback up the Ridge Road, parking in the gravel turnout of an abandoned logging trail that overlooked the Garrow property. Through his binoculars, he watched. The Garrow house was a sprawling, yellow-sided ranch with a manicured lawn that looked out over the valley. At 2:15 p.m., a white tanker truck with road derooter stenciled on the side pulled into the driveway, its diesel engine idling heavily. 10 minutes later, a second truck, this one belonging to a local independent septic service, pulled up behind it, blocking the mailbox. Julian saw Delbert emerge from his backyard workshop, his face red beneath his grease-stained cap, waving his arms in wild, defensive gestures as the 2 drivers climbed down with clipboards in hand. Even from 50 yards away, Julian could hear the faint, angry rise of their voices over the wind. As they argued, a third vehicle, a bright green van belonging to a regional termite control company, slowed down at the mailbox, its turn signal blinking with patient, mechanical regularity. Julian felt a cold, hard knot in his chest loosen slightly. It wasn't joy. It was the simple, mathematical satisfaction of a weight being shifted from one side of a ledger to the other. But the Garrows were people of faith. Bernice, in particular, lived in a world where her social standing was reinforced by her presence in the front pew of the First Baptist Church every Sunday morning. Her leather-bound Bible held flat against her chest like a shield. She was a woman who had once stood at a town council meeting and argued that a small, independent bookstore on Main Street should be stripped of its business license because they carried occult materials, which turned out to be a display of young adult fantasy novels. Julian opened a new tab. He began with the traditional proselytizing organizations. He submitted Bernice and Delbert's home address and primary phone numbers to the local stakes of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the regional Kingdom Halls of Jehovah's Witnesses. He filled out the request a home visit forms with meticulous care, checking the boxes that indicated the residents were struggling with doubt and seeking urgent spiritual guidance in the home. He added notes suggesting that the residents might appear hostile or defensive at first, a common reaction when the Spirit begins to work on a hardened heart, and urged the elders not to be deterred by initial rejections. Within days, the clean-shaven young men in white shirts and black ties began to arrive on the ridge, their bicycles leaning against Bernice's white vinyl fence while they knocked patiently on the front door. Julian did not stop there. He expanded the circle. He registered her primary email address with the Seventh-day Adventists, the Christadelphians, and several traditionalist Catholic ministries that specialized in apocalyptic literature. Then he crossed the threshold. He found the directories for regional pagan circles, Wiccan covens, and Druidic preservation societies. He signed Bernice up for newsletters with titles like The Horned Path and Sabbat Rhythms, using her real name and her business email address, the one she used to communicate with her high-end stained glass clients. He registered her for information packets from the local Islamic center in the Tri-County area, requesting booklets on Quranic study and Arabic calligraphy classes. Each registration left a digital footprint, a tiny, sticky thread that connected her professional identity to organizations she had spent her entire life publicly denouncing. The turning point came after a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Julian accompanied his mother to her weekly therapy session in the next town over the only trip she would agree to make, provided Julian drove and kept the child locks engaged on the passenger door. He sat in the waiting room, the air smelling of lavender water and old magazines, listening to the muffled, low murmur of his mother's voice through the drywall. She sounded so small. This was a woman who used to handle 300-pound sheets of plate glass with the casual strength of a dockworker, now reduced to a whisper that couldn't carry through a hollow core door. When they returned home, Julian went straight to the basement. His fingers were cold, his skin gray from the glare of the monitor. He opened a private browser window and accessed the portal for the Church of Satan. The registration page was simple, almost elegant. It required an email verification, which he knew Bernice would receive with a cold, visceral shock when she opened her inbox on a Monday morning. But he didn't stop there. He moved to the Satanic Temple's storefront and newsletter registry, signing her up for updates on their reproductive rights campaigns and their efforts to install demonic monuments on state capitol lawns. For Delbert, Julian took a different route. He downloaded the installation packages for several location-based social networking applications, including Grindr. Using a burner phone and a virtual SMS receiver, he created a profile under Delbert's name, using a cropped photo of Delbert's own GMC truck, the one with his business logo visible on the tailgate as the profile picture. He set the status to discreet, married, looking for immediate connection on the ridge. He configured the profile to send verification codes and notification alerts directly to Delbert's mobile number. The digital mesh was now complete. It was an invisible, self-sustaining ecosystem of irritation, an automated engine of social and spiritual distress that Julian had wound up like a grandfather clock and left to run in the dark. 3 weeks later, Julian saw Bernice in the aisle of the regional hardware store, the one place he couldn't avoid going to buy salt for their home water softener. She looked different. The stiff, lacquered hair was slightly flat on one side, and the sharp, bright-eyed confidence that had characterized her for a decade had soured into a twitchy, defensive vigilance. When a man in a high-visibility work vest stepped into the aisle behind her, she flinched, her purse clutched so tightly against her ribs that the leather creaked. She was checking her phone every 40 seconds, her thumb flying across the screen with a frantic, aggressive motion, her face pale in the green-tinted glare of the fluorescent tubes. She didn't see him. Julian stood behind a stack of concrete mix, his eyes fixed on the small, gold-plated cross around her neck. It looked tarnished. The rumors had already begun to filter down through the damp wood of the St. Jude's Bend post office. People spoke of the Garrows house as a place of strange, constant activity. Truck drivers parked in their ditch at odd hours. Young men with pamphlets stood on their porch while Delbert screamed at them from the garage. The local police cruiser had been seen idling near their driveway after a series of harassment reports that Bernice had filed concerning satanic literature appearing in her digital inbox. Some of the older church members had begun to whisper about Delbert's phone, about a strange, persistent series of text messages from unknown men that had caused a loud, door-slamming argument during a Sunday afternoon potluck. The Garrows marriage, once a sterile monument of small-town propriety, was beginning to show the thin, dark spiderwebs of structural failure. Julian walked back to his car, the heavy bag of salt crusting his fingers. He drove home slowly, navigating the potholes that the city council had forgotten to patch after the flood. When he entered the house, the kitchen was dark. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic click of the dehumidifier in the corner and the soft, dry rustle of his mother's slippers on the linoleum. She was sitting at the table, a cup of cold tea between her hands, staring at a small square of clear glass she had found in an old drawer. "Julian?" she asked, her voice barely rising above the hum of the appliance. "Yeah, Ma, I heard. I heard Bernice is having a hard time," Sally from the church called. She said Bernice's business phone has been ringing so much with junk calls she had to take her listing down from the yellow pages. She said they're thinking of moving out of the county. Julian set the bag of salt down by the cellar door. He didn't smile. He didn't feel the warm, golden rush of triumph that the stories always promised. He felt only the cold, level weight of an anchor that had finally found the bottom of a very deep lake. "People get what they build, Ma," he said softly. He walked down the stairs to the basement. The monitor was still on, the screensaver casting a pale, underwater blue across the joists. He sat down, his fingers returning to the home row of the mechanical keyboard. He opened the master spreadsheet. He didn't delete the files. He didn't close the accounts. He simply added a new tab labeled Maintenance. He set a reminder on his digital calendar for the third Tuesday of every month, a recurring task that would run for the next 10 years, or for as long as he had an internet connection and a finger to press the keys. A new septic quote here, a pagan newsletter renewal there. A political action committee donation request in Delbert's name to the most radical factions of both parties. He would not let them heal. He would not let them find a quiet corner in this wet, rotting valley where they could forget what they had taken from the woman upstairs. He would be the hum in their walls, the vibration in their pockets, the shadow that waited for them every time they reached for the latch of their front door. Julian closed his eyes, listening to the rain slide down the basement window, and began to type.